Hello and welcome to the review of the day, which is for The Warrior's Apprentice by Lois McMaster Bujold. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. Bujold? Anyhow, great cover, very, very space opera, science fiction-ish, which is exactly what this is. It's the second one in the Vorkosigan Saga. Vorkosigan. There's a lot of mispronouncing happening here today, I suspect. Which I would call space opera of the military variety, so military space opera-ish book. And apparently it's a really, really long series. This is only the second one in chronological writing order. It is only the second one that I've read, but apparently there's dozens. There have been... The first one was published in 1986. That would be the one I read first, Shards of Honor, and which I really enjoyed. There's a review somewhere out there on the YouTubes for it. Apparently she's still writing, and the internet thinks that the most recently published one was 1918, but there might be one since then that I don't know about. The series got multiple Hugo Awards, including Best Series. Again, not sure if this specific book got any. But yeah, anyway, very well known series. In case you haven't read any of the Vorkosigan Saga, nor even heard about it, this one starts with our main protagonist, who is Miles Vorkosigan. And it starts with him trying to get into the Barayaran Military Academy. It actually starts with his first day of physical trials. He's already passed all his... Come on then. He's already passed all his theory trials, academic trials. Oh, goodness gracious. Birds who can't decide what they want from life. He's already passed them very well. But now he's going on to the physical side, and that could be more difficult for him because Miles is born with a large number of physical disabilities. And if you have read the first one in the series, Shards of Honor, you'll know why. His father was subject to an assassination attempt while Miles was still in the womb. His mother got a lot of poison gas, and that has significantly retarded his physical growth, and his bones are subject to breaking. So we watched with Miles as he starts on the obstacle course, and the very first wall that he jumps off, he smashes up all his leg bones basically, and that's the end of that. So after having prepared his whole life to enter this academy, he's now at a loose end. As a consequence of that, he decides to visit his grandmother. That's his maternal grandmother. So in the first novel, which I keep harping on, and you don't really need to have read Shards of Honor to enjoy The Warrior's Apprentice. You can enjoy it very well on its own. It doesn't require you to have read the previous one, but the previous one does give you the background of the combat between the Beta colony, from which Miles's mother comes, which is a very technology-rich, egalitarian, very progressive, both in attitudes and in technology and medicine, versus the Society of Barayar, which his father comes from. That's where his Vorkosigan surname comes from, though he has also been gifted his mother's surname of Naismith. So he's Miles something or other, I've forgotten, Naismith Vorkosigan. His mother renounced the Beta colony to move to Vorkosigan to marry Miles's father after the events in that first book. Barayar is not what we'd call progressive. It is exceptionally patriarchal. No women in the military, etc. Women get married basically and have children. It's militaristic. It's hierarchical. It is very, very much a... what's that word for society that's based on king, barons to king? That thing. There's a word for it, but I can't remember it. Anyway. So Miles decides, in the wake of his having to leave the academy, to go and visit his beaten grandmother, Mrs. Naismith, over on Beta. And he goes with a fairly small entourage, which probably smaller than you get away with on his planet of Barrier. He has his bodyguard, who is his constant shadow, and his name begins with B, and I'm not sure I've even pronounced it inside my head, who is a great character. I really, really enjoy the character of Dendarii. Found it. Dendarii existed in the first book as well, and so we know a lot more of his background, which is far from salubrious. But in this book, he is Miles's bodyguard, personal shadow, I guess, manservant. Basically, his whole world is Miles, and he follows him around, does what he can for him. And of course, he follows him to Beta, where he's previously travelled to with Miles when Miles was doing a 1-year student exchange and living with his grandmother there. The other person who travels them with is Eleni, Bothari's daughter. She is not very happy on Barian. She's an intelligent, well-educated young woman who wants life for herself. On Barian, that basically means having an arranged marriage with a dowry. And that's what her father wants for her. Her mother is notoriously absent, and if you've read the first book, you'll know a little bit about how that came to be. But Helena herself knows nothing about that. Her past and her mother have never really been disclosed to her. And through this book, early on, we have this interesting thing where Miles tries to help her to get information about her mother, only to find that it's really heavily hidden behind secrecies. Anyway, when he travels to Beta, he travels with Elani as well as her father, his bodyguard. And where has my bird gone? And what is it chewing? What are you chewing? Okay, fair enough. Delicious floor crumbs, apparently. So this is where we're at. He travels to Beta. In the spaceport, while Bothari is trying to get through the investigations, since he apparently always tries to carry weapons through and always gets caught up. But Miles grabs Elani and they're travelling around the spaceport and they're enjoying the differences. It's Elani's first trip away from Barriaran. And Miles is really enjoying looking through all these amazing sights and society with her. And by now we know that Miles is deeply in love with Elani. The reason he's never said anything about it is he can't find the words because he sees himself as broken and useless. He's much shorter than other people. Physically speaking, he feels inferior. A sensation that a lot of people can associate, understand, emote with, though in his case it's an actual physical disabilities. So the two young people are sitting there in the airport, and Miles overhears this talk between security. There's a guy who's locked himself in the spaceship, and he's threatening to explode it if someone tries to come in. It's his spaceship, but it's been sold to a wrecker. The wrecker is trying to board it. The security personnel are trying to defuse the situation. No one wants any sort of responsibility. And Miles launches himself into the situation. He goes aboard the spaceship. He talks the disenfranchised owner into coming off and becoming his vassal so that he won't be charged in beaten society. And then next thing you know, he's basically bought a spaceship and taken its pilot. Miles took on this guy whose name I can't remember at all. Mayhew, I think was his surname. Anyway, pilot guy. And it's an old ship. It's such an old ship that it can't be repaired. The things that you need to repair it don't exist anymore. Anyway, he goes to his grandmother's and he's trying to figure out what to do with this spaceship. And right now, let's say that Miles told some whoppers to get this guy to come out in one piece. One of them which One of which was that he was a member of the Dendarii mercenaries, coming to Beta for medical attention. So that starts the whole evolution of this story. He ends up having to find some cargo for this ship to take elsewhere to get the money to pay off the ship that he's bought. And then he, not entirely unconsciously, takes on a cargo which is military shipments to a people who are engaged in a small private interstellar. Is it interstellar, intersystem war, one of those things? And he knows their weapons, and he knows he's going to have to disguise them, so they disguise them in the ship, and then they go on this mission. And next thing you know, he's ended up with the whole story of the Dendarii mercenaries just keeps growing. And by the end of the book, and it's not a tiny book, it's 372 pages, by the end the Dendarii mercenaries have become multiple ships, multiple crews. It's a whole big structure. It's a fun romp of a space opera, and it is, for me, entirely and completely unbelievable from the get-go. Now, there's so many things I like about this. The writing in itself isn't marvelous. It's good, but workmanlike. I like the contrast between the high-tech beta society and the patriarchal and hierarchical Barrieren. I liked Miles sort of caught in the middle of it. I liked it overall. It's got some cool characters. You only really get character development for Miles himself. All the peripheral characters aren't that strongly fleshed out. They don't really need to be. They just need to be there to do the things they're doing. And that's okay. You've got a really large, complex and intriguing plot, and that's good as well. The whole development of the Dendarii mercenaries and how it happened by accident and then became huge. It became so huge that even if it started with an accident and a lie, by the end of it, it's real one way or another. I loved all that, and the ending was marvelous. I really enjoyed the ending. So much so that I think many other people who, like me, throughout the book may not have been blown away, probably enjoyed the ending so much that they remember this book very, very fondly. However, there was a lot about it that I didn't like, and it's long, so there's plenty of space for these things that I didn't like as much to take grip. I didn't like, and occasionally even resorted to skim reading for a little while, the acute improbability of Miles choosing to do some of the things that he chooses to do. Now, if you're going to promote him as this incredible military strategist, foresightful guy, that's fine. And you can see that once you can see the original time he mentioned Dendarii mercenaries because he was drunk and he was trying to get someone to do something, not suicide. You'd throw that out there, but several other times when he promoted this notion, it made no sense. And a lot of him promoting this notion had to do with him not wanting to harm captured people who were going to harm him. So instead, every time he captures enemies, he basically spins more of this lie of the Dendarii mercenaries and takes them all on as more mercenaries. And while I am reasonably good at suspension of disbelief, my suspension crashed to the ground a few times here. It is beyond believable that some of these people would have responded the way this plot wants them to. It is beyond incredible that someone who's been on his way into the military academy and has done all the theory should be so oblivious to the fact that conquered enemies are dangerous, and there's no way to suspend disbelief enough to imagine that every single one pretty much of all these captured people becomes his devoted employee, liege, whatever. It doesn't make sense. Still, if you can actively suspend your disbelief enough, it's still a pretty good story. Another thing that I wasn't crazy about in it is the lack of military, because I was first recommended Bujold as a military space opera after I had touted how much I enjoyed Elizabeth Moon, Tanya Huff. I like military stories in general. Military space opera is my jam, and this is meant to be that. And honestly, it kind of isn't. It's like those two spaceships firing lasers at each other in space with explosions in the background. That would be great, but it's not what you get. You actually get virtually no military and virtually no fighting. You do get Miles winning through his superior mental abilities, and that's fine for what it is. But the attempted battles are poor. Really quite poor, I've got to say. So it was a fail for me in that regard, and honestly, number one was a fail in that regard too. So the Shards of Honor was meant to be a military space opera as well. It's got a little bit more military than this one does, but basically it's about people and their relationships, and the battles are completely and utterly incidental to any of that. Now, both books have got extremely good tech. So the tech descriptions by the author are amazing. She really describes the spaceships well. In this case, there's a mining station. She describes the mining station excellently. You've got things like bulkheads and welding and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily normally expect to see. Oh, that's not going to work too well. In space opera. And all of that creates a very strong spaceship background. But I've got to say, I just don't think fighting scenes are Bujold's strength. I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this series seems to go on forever. So maybe in some of the later ones she actually does battles and she does them well. If so, by all means tell me about them and tell me I'm wrong. I'm good with being called out when I'm wrong. But if you're gonna be military space opera, you need battles, and there really aren't any. There's one where everyone goes tail feathers. You needed tail feathers in your life, right? There's one where they finally invade a spaceship, and we know it's going to be their toughest battle yet because it's basically military defended, and they're going in. We see almost nothing of that. We see nothing of any battle, really, to be honest. We see more of the training exercise at the end than we ever do of anything else. And the measures that are described as being used to keep experienced mercenaries in place and believing that they've joined a mercenary organization are laughable. It is absolutely impossible to believe any of it. And then you've got Miles overnight creating a standing operational orders for this fantasy military mercenary organization. That also is not believable. Anyhow, complain, whinge, moan. It's still a good book. It's still a very good space opera. Sure. It's a very good space opera. It doesn't score well militarily speaking, so it doesn't make a good fighting space opera, but for what it is, it's a lot of fun. If you enjoy space opera and you don't really care too much about battles and the mechanics of fighting and all of that sort of thing, I think you'll really enjoy it. So I have seen also that while it's the second in the Vorkosigan Saga, apparently what Bujold did was she created a very, very complex genealogy, and there's a lot of people who've read more of it have claimed that they've come back from reading later ones to read this one because it's the first with Miles Vorkosigan, and apparently Miles becomes a primary character throughout, and I can see that happening. I don't hate this book. I liked it. I didn't like it enough that I'm racing out there to find more of the Vorkosigan Saga, and I didn't love it that much that I'll feel devastated if I never read any more of it, but I won't rule it out. Now, I have heard that this is, while interesting, is not the best of the Vorkosigan Saga. Apparently there's better ones. So if you've read this saga and you love it a lot and you think there are better ones, tell me what they are. I'll add it to my already not so small books to find in the wild list, and we'll see how we go from there. Otherwise, thank you for watching this review. Read good books, perhaps even this one, and have a great new year, which is coming up shortly. Bye.